For our last session today, we have a panel discussion led by the Nevada Housing Coalition. It's called Housing That Heals, Trauma-Informed Design and Supportive Housing. Moderating our panel today is Joanna Grant. She is the project and grant coordinator for the Nevada Housing Coalition. She's working on a statewide capacity building project to promote and advance affordable housing across Nevada. Joanna recently returned to her hometown of Las Vegas after 10 years in the Pacific Northwest, working in supportive housing, harm reduction, and diversion programs. She has significant experience providing direct services to chronically unhoused individuals from the streets to transitional, supportive, and independent housing. Joanna has a BA in Cultural Studies from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and an MA in Interdisciplinary Graduate Studies from the University of British Columbia, Okanagan. She started her career in nonprofits at the UNLV Women's Center and is thrilled to be back home in Las Vegas, making herself useful to the community that raised her. Joanna, here you go.
Thank you so much, Stacy. That was a full introduction. Thank you so much. As Stacy said, my name is Joanna. I work for the Nevada Housing Coalition, and I am really excited today to talk about this topic. It's something I'm really passionate about in terms of supportive housing because of my experience there in Seattle. And as the project and grant coordinator here at the Nevada Housing Coalition, I'm working on a project right now called Elevate Nevada, where we're really working to increase the capacity across the state to build affordable and supportive housing, to really increase the amount of inventory we have for the moderate to low and extremely low income population. So I'll get right to it and introduce our first panelist today, Ariana Saunders. Ariana works for CSH, which is one of our education partners with the Elevate Nevada program, and we do a lot of supportive housing development, capacity building, education, and training with CSH. Ariana has over 15 years of experience in program evaluation, quality improvement training, and human services leadership. And as Associate Director of the Training Center at the Corporation for Supportive Housing, CSH, she's responsible for leading the work on quality supportive housing standards and providing a strategic vision at the training center. So Ariana is going to open up the discussion today and talk a little bit about what supportive housing is and its connection to trauma-informed design and the history of trauma-informed design. Thank you, Ariana.
Excellent. Thank you, Joanna. Yeah, so happy to be here. I'm just going to pull up my slides so I can show you all some visuals while we do this. So yeah, as Joanna said, happy to be here with you all. Ariana Saunders from CSH, Associate Director there. I've been there for a couple of years. Before I get started and give you, the plan is to go a little bit, just to give a little bit of background or supportive housing 101, if you will, in a couple minutes. I won't take too long, but just so we all are on the same page about what we mean when we talk about supportive housing. And then just talk a little bit about how as supportive housing grew, evolved, and improved, how trauma-informed design really became a core component of the work that we do. And we saw really improve the outcomes and an overall quality of supportive housing across the country. And so very excited to share with you all that today. And then of course, continue to learn from a fabulous panelist that I'm co-paneling, is that a word? That I'm also paneling this discussion with today. Okay, so just a little bit about CSH. Sorry, this is like our little mini 60-minute commercial. CSH, or Corporation for Supportive Housing, we're actually a national nonprofit that works collaboratively across the country in various communities to really build the capacity and the ability for more and more programs and communities to develop supportive housing. We really see supportive housing as a solution to some of our community's biggest challenges and barriers, specifically the amount of people experiencing homelessness across the country. And so we really try to do that as a way to help not just improve the lives of those individuals and households, but also we see it as a way to really maximize resources as well as help communities thrive overall. And so we do that through 4 various lines of business, as we like to categorize it. So what we do lending. So we do provide some lending and loans for usually around the capital side for folks to build some new supportive housing projects. We also do a lot of TA and consulting. So working directly with providers and other communities to understand how best to develop innovative cutting edge strategies to either improve or develop more quality supportive housing. A lot of what I do as a training center is we do a lot of training education, such as presentations like this, but we also have a training center where I'm the associate director, where we provide ongoing trainings around best practices and just help providers and staff that are working in supportive housing develop their skills and knowledge so that they can do the best that they can to provide services to folks that are in supportive housing. And we also do a lot of advocacy around policy reform. So that is a lot of what CSH does. We do try to do this because our goal, again, is we're trying to drive impact and improve communities as well as the individual lives of the folks that may be traditionally underserved in our communities, to make sure that they can not only access housing, but also maintain it and thrive in their communities, as we all want to. And so we're really proud to do this through these various ways or various mechanisms, again, through our 4 business lines. But really, we try to use innovation, education, also, as well as try to advocate for more or help distribute additional resources into communities to make that work through all these various strategies. And one of those things is really being able to identify what it looks like and what are some best practices that can help inform the work that we do around supportive housing, which is why I'm so excited to talk to you all today about trauma-informed design and supportive housing. And just a quick note on our training center, I have to do that, that's where I'm from. We do live webinars, as I said. We do self-paced, free on-demand trainings. A lot of times we offer folks. We do in-person workshops, as well as a lot of customized training and learning for specific communities and organizations. And one of our proudest products is we have a Supportive Housing Institute, which is where a lot of this talk about trauma-informed design happens, because we put together teams of folks that are planning and developing new projects for supportive housing and coach them on best practices and help guide them along the way. And one of those topics really is about how do we think about the physical components, the design of the overall building and community, as well as the individual units, to best meet the needs of the populations that they want to serve in those units. So really excited to be here with you all today. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what supportive housing is. The best and simplest way to define that is it's affordable housing paired with services. And so the idea is we really look at populations, or the primary populations or focus populations for a lot of supportive housing are those folks that without the services and without maybe rental assistance or that support to make the rent affordable, they would either struggle to maintain their housing or not even be able to access housing at all. And so we really look at helping people build that capacity to do that. The other key that we really like to stress with supportive housing is that it is not a time-limited intervention. You may hear a lot of communities say permanent supportive housing. We like to take the permanent out because we want that to be defined within supportive housing, meaning true supportive housing isn't time limited. It should be permanent in nature. And if that's what somebody needs for the rest of their lives, then we want to be able to help communities and providers provide that and sustain that. If they don't need that, really, this is a great intervention for people to take the time that they need to stabilize, figure out what their next steps are, and then move on and continue to live autonomously with dignity and thriving in their communities and the happiness that we all hope for. So that is like the very basic definition of supportive housing. Another way to look at it, just a graphic to kind of show you all what that means, is again, the affordability component is the key cornerstone of it. And the idea there is, just as any of us, we shouldn't really be paying more than 30% of our total income towards housing. The idea is for rent, mortgage, whatever the case may be, really being able to limit that and make it affordable, knowing that there's additional responsibilities and need, right, for other money to live your life, thrive, and be an active community member. So that is one key component to it. We need to get folks housed in somewhere that's safe and sound and quality and looks nice, but we also want to make sure that they can afford it for the long term. And then to do that, the support side of it is really giving those wraparound services. And so what this graphic is just looking at is when we say support services, it's a really broad definition, because we're really mean any kind of services or support that person may need or that household may need. We say household because it could be a couple, it could be a family, anything they need to maintain that housing and thrive and achieve whatever goals they want to achieve. Is it going back to school? Is it working? Is it reunifying with their family? Whatever that case is we want to be able to not always directly provide those services, but connect them to those services to make sure that they're able to succeed and thrive. And so that can look like some employment services. It can look like helping parents with their coaching. So maybe if their children are in the child welfare system, putting them up and setting them up for success so that they can reunify with their children. It also, a lot of it is around case management or just that overall care coordination for folks, connecting them to any kind of behavioral health, or overall medical care that they need, and making sure that they can get those services and they're really taking care of themselves. The whole person is really what we're looking at, because we know that all of this can impact someone's ability to maintain their unit, pay their rent on time, and just really succeed in living independently. So that's what it is. The key there too with the support services is they are voluntary, and we want them to be flexible. Again, the goal is meeting those individual needs, figuring out what you as an individual needs to stay in your housing and thrive, and then creating a plan to help you meet those needs and address those needs. So that is the core of it. When we talk about supportive housing, we talk about it in 4 kind of components with that. So in order to achieve all that, as you can imagine, one key thing and why we're here today is first we need the actual structure, right? The bricks and mortars of it all. And so there's a lot of thought and consideration that goes into the overall housing design and planning of each program. It also is really, there's a huge component when it comes to property management and housing management. And so that's, again, taking care of the overall structure, making sure that common living spaces as well as the overall building is operating effectively and efficiently, as well as collecting rent, like other property managers. The support services does all that wraparound support and care coordination. And then we also really see supportive housing as a key intervention that really can help communities thrive. And so we always encourage projects and programs to really think about what their relationship to the community looks like. How are they addressing the community's larger issues, whether it be people experiencing homelessness in shelters or on the streets, folks that are cycling in and out of various institutions and wanting to be able to break that cycle by providing people a safe and stable place to live. We see that as a real key component. So always encourage projects to understand what the community needs are and being able to articulate and build their program in a way that will support filling those gaps and addressing the needs in the community. So we kind of see that as those 4 main kind of buckets or functions or components of supportive housing to really help it thrive and help build communities. What you'll see probably across your communities or across the state here is there's 3 different major types of supportive housing. There's project-based, or sometimes people say congregate settings or single site. And that's essentially looking like any other apartment building. It can be 15 units, it can be 100 units. But the idea is at least a significant amount of that building is dedicated towards supportive housing, often subsidized through other funding to pay for the ongoing operations, and then support services often are provided within that space. Again, the idea is usually for these, it's 100% supportive housing. So every unit in that building is dedicated to somebody who has been identified as someone who needs supportive housing. We also have tenant-based or scattered site. That's actually what you'll see predominantly across the country here, or across our state. Sorry, I'm used to talking at the national level. In Nevada, we have a lot of what we call tenant-based or scattered site. And so that's working with individual landlords to find and identify units and apartments that folks can live in. And so the benefit of that is people are more integrated within the community. They're not singled out. The downside of that, unlike the single site, is it's often hard to provide services directly. You can't have services on site for some of that, and then you have to compete with other folks in the general market that are renting in your community. And then we have some integrated, which we're seeing growing more and more across the country. And I know that we're looking at more projects looking like that to develop in our state. And that really is looking at basically combining, that single site concept, but mixing it so it's not 100% supportive housing, but you may have fair regular market or other affordable housing units dedicated to other folks that may not necessarily need those services, but they're able to integrate it all in one building, basically. So the tenancy is mixed, some supportive housing tenants, some tenants that may be coming from the general rental market. So that's basically what you'll usually see, and that's when projects that we work with often in the community looks like. Just want to be clear too on what supportive housing is not. It's not a treatment model or a method. It's not to be confused with recovery housing or sober living kind of models that are often out there in our community and across our state. It's also, again, like I said, not transitional or time limited. It really is meant to be permanent in nature. and there for as long as the individual needs those intense services and that rental assistance support. And it's also not licensed community care like assisted living or nursing homes. It's very different than that. These services are provided on site. They often are housed on site too, but they don't have to go through the same licensure and other heavy regulations that like a licensed community care or community-based living group homes and other organizations have to work through. And so how we define supportive housing and the key components of it really is about, again, wanting to make sure we're engaging tenants with multiple barriers to housing. So as I said, folks who without those services and that rental assistance would have a hard time accessing or maintaining their housing. And I'll give you examples of what that looks like in 1 second. We also want to make sure that, it should look like any other rental unit in terms of providing a traditional lease, again, making sure it's affordable, as well as making sure we're engaging tenants in those services and coordinating with other community partners, providers, and services so that anybody that's in that unit and the folks that we're serving are getting all the services that they need and the support that they need to maintain their housing. And so, like I said, this is just an example of the types of folks that we serve in supportive housing. The most common or largest population that most folks tend to focus on as a primary population for supportive housing are folks that are defined as chronically homeless. And so those would be people considered, just to simplify it, there's a very specific definition that HUD uses to qualify somebody as chronically homeless. But the idea is it's somebody who has experienced long-term homelessness, as well as what we call a disabling condition. So that can be a mental illness, a chronic health condition, something that is preventing that's diagnosable and preventing this person from being able to maintain or obtain a job and live completely independently without those support services. And so oftentimes these are folks that have been homeless for over a year. I've had several episodes of homelessness that amount to over 12 months, as well as a disabling condition such as a mental illness, substance use disorder, or another chronic health condition that prevents them from maintaining a full-time job. And so those are the folks that you will often see. These other categories are not mutually exclusive, as I just said. They may also be folks, you may also see projects that are dedicated towards folks with serious mental illness. We do have projects that really target folks that are families that are exiting our child welfare system and other systems, such as our justice systems. We do have a couple programs, especially here in Southern Nevada, that focus frequent users of our system. So folks that are frequently in and out of emergency shelters, emergency rooms, other, the jails. We know that those cost our systems a lot. And if we can get them housed, we can break that cycle. As well as persons with intellectual and disabling conditions, seniors, youth. And so again, these are all folks that we know that unfortunately are experiencing barriers, have had trauma, and have had experiences that are preventing them from being able to obtain housing or be able to stay housed on their own. And so this is where supportive housing comes in to share and support them. And as I said, as you think about those people, those populations that I know I went over quickly, but and briefly, a lot of those folks, as we said, will have experienced homelessness or housing instability, meaning they're couch surfing or moving from, home to home, family, friend to friend until they can find a stable living. And just really wanted to pause and recognize how these experiences really are a form of trauma. And we really define trauma as any kind of like significant event or experience that is impacts somebody significantly in a way that is going to shape them or change the way they're able to recover from that. And so really the idea is, we have acute forms of trauma, like, serious mental illness or serious accident, but you also have more chronic and complex forms of trauma like homelessness, that day-to-day living of not knowing where you're going to sleep the next day or not knowing where you're going to get your next meal, or being afraid that, the one bag you have of your precious belongings might be stolen overnight if you fall asleep. And so those are like chronic forms of trauma that we see a lot of folks experience. We also know that it can be a bit of a cycle, and we don't know where it starts, but oftentimes people do experience homelessness or enter homelessness because they're struggling with a mental illness or substance use disorder. But oftentimes that experience of homelessness in of itself, because it is so traumatic, some folks turn, we see the onset of mental illness developed, or just overall people's overall mental wellness and health really, really suffering because of that. And so really just recognizing that cycle of trauma. And we've learned, went the wrong way. And we've learned through doing this work, supportive housing's been around for over 30 years. CSH has been around for over 30 years. First supportive housing units we started seeing pop up was around the 70s or 80s. So it's been around for a long time. And as we've collected more data and understood what it meant to serve these folks, we really understood how that cycle of trauma impacts folks. And we lean on, the medical field as well as the behavioral health field and other research arms of those fields to really understand how trauma impacts folks, because the better we can understand how trauma impacts them, because 99.9% of the people that we serve in supportive housing have experienced trauma and are overcoming that and recovering from that. Understanding how that impacts them really helps us understand how to better serve them. And so just wanted to share a quick graphic to just kind of demonstrate how trauma can impact somebody, their overall well-being. People experience trauma in childhood. We've all experienced trauma in our adulthood. We are all getting out of the trauma of living through a pandemic. And so understanding how that impacts our overall physical health, our mental health, emotional health is really important, because that helps us understand how to better serve those folks. And so over time, as supportive housing has evolved and we figured out how to best serve folks and keep them housed, and what are the best practices? What does the evidence say? What is research telling us about what folks need to stay housed and feel like they're able to thrive in their communities or in a new safe environment? We really lean on trauma-informed care. And this is really about, this is the SAMHSA definition of what trauma-informed care is. And so it's really about the idea of understanding how identifying some principles, which I'll share in a second, and some practices can really create this culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. And so that's really a core component of what we do in supportive housing. Again, as you imagine, folks who've experienced homelessness, who've experienced a significant trauma that may have led to that homelessness, they really need that type of support to get them into a place where they can feel safe. And that's when they can start feeling empowered. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of need that you may have seen, it's really identifying those basic needs of safety and security for folks, so they have the ability, the mental capacity, the wherewithal even to think about some of these additional needs that they need to do that will help them in their recovery and their healing from that trauma. And so although most folks in supportive housing aren't clinicians and aren't doing this from a clinical perspective, they are able to incorporate a lot of this in how they approach tenants. But really what we do is lean on these 6 principles to understand what does it mean to engage folks, support folks. And so that first one is safety. And that's where that bricks and mortar, that design of a unit and a building really comes into key component here, is really understanding how people can feel safe. To feel safe in terms of their overall mental health and their physical safety, as well as using these other principles to engage them and support them. Sorry, this feels like a sociology webinar. I promise I'll be done soon. I'm going to start talking about design in 1 second. But this is just kind of the background of how we got to here and to trauma-informed design. And so recognizing these principles, one thing that we recognized is we have to, in adapting these best practices, we have to constantly look at what's working, what's not working in supportive housing to make sure we're getting the outcomes that we want. And so really how we started to develop these core, best practices and quality standards for supportive housing was by using a continuous quality improvement process of really understanding what's working, what's not working. And the key was really getting feedback from tenants and staff. And so we learned a lot from older buildings and buildings that were built, many years ago, to get the idea of, what was working and what wasn't working. And we got a lot of feedback, not just on the services, but on the building side of it too, as well, to understand, what really, what tenants really needed in a building and a unit, what made them feel safe, what made them feel welcome, and what made them feel supported. And so using this process is where we did get a lot of feedback and really understood that as much as we used to focus a lot on support services and thinking the assumption was if we get somebody safe, and in 4 walls where it's nice and warm, or in Nevada, cool, is recognizing that there's more to just that. That's going to make somebody feel safe and supported, and really support their overall healing and recovery. And so we use that tenant feedback to understand and learn about, how can we address this so we can reach the outcomes that we want. And so we did that by developing some standards about what is quality supportive housing. And I'm just going to skip to what those standards look like when it relates to design. And so these are the standards that you'll see on the left side, is how we define quality supportive housing based on that feedback from tenants, from staff, and really understanding what's working and what's not working. Thanks, Craig, is really recognizing that it needs to be tenant centered, right? With anything, the customer comes first, right? And so for supportive housing, that's tenants, understanding what they need, that's going to meet their needs. So really recognizing that there's certain design features, the way and the layout of a building that really supports that leads to that feeling of belonging, that community, allows them to have some of that interaction and support with each other, as well as the staff that are working with them. We also really understood how important it was to make sure that all supportive housing is accessible. So not just to make sure that they can access services, but to make sure that their unit and the design of the unit is accessible, meeting their needs, knowing that folks come to supportive housing with various abilities when it comes to their physical abilities and their mental abilities. And so recognizing how can we make those more conducive to the folks that we're serving in supportive housing. Also recognizing supportive housing is really a coordinated effort. And the folks that will talk after me will talk, I know a little bit about how important it is to work with tenants and the staff that are going to be working within those buildings to understand what's really needed, what are the key features or the important features to make sure that that building continues to be sustainable, and the quality is able to be maintained. It's also, we want it to be integrated, and so you saw some pictures earlier from the slides, and you'll see some fabulous pictures later of what supportive housing can look like. But the idea really is that we want it to look, just as nice and what I tell people too is you want it to look like a home that you would want to send one of your loved ones, or you would even want to live in. So dispelling that myth that it needs to look like some kind of institutional or very structured environment, but that can we build units and buildings that fit within the community, don't stick out, but really are fully integrated into it. So folks don't feel like they're being stigmatized or burdening that community, and actually adding to the community and the value of the property there. And then last, of course, but not least, is we want it to be sustainable. And so a lot of that's about funding and resources, but a lot of that is too about things that you all are much more have the expertise on than I do, but incorporating features and materials that are going to make sure that that building is able to be operated and sustained moving forward, is going to be really important. So a lot of that lately, of course, has been looking at efficiency options, but also really making sure that it meets the needs of folks, and that they're utilizing all the features of the building to the best of their ability. And so just briefly, and how all of this has evolved over time is, again, as we've continued to hear back from folks, we've talked to folks across the country and learned like some great innovative strategic processes that people use. There's a real big practical component to a lot of it that I'm sure you'll hear from some of the panelists later today after me, is really going to be important, but really stressing that collaborative part too, in the fact that really wanting to make sure that we hear from tenants or potential future tenants or current tenants and other supportive housing projects, as well as staff, to understand what the ideal design should look like and what are the features that they'll need in those buildings and each individual unit is really going to be important. And then, making sure there's processes to hold ourselves in terms of the folks that are building the supportive housing and operating them accountable to maintaining those standards of quality moving forward. Again, hoping that all the folks that are coordinating and collaborating to make these projects successful are really continue to be dedicated and have that shared vision of wanting to see folks thrive and continue to thrive in these units and in their communities. So it really has, as a field has evolved through supportive housing and to build more supportive housing and are empowering more communities to plan, develop, and create more supportive housing, we've really seen how trauma-informed design has really supported that, because it's really helped us recognize how that physical space can contribute to all of this. And so we've seen a lot of really innovative ways that folks have addressed the needs of tenants, and also seeing how when we do take trauma-informed design, we take design as well as services and support into consideration, that we do see some really positive outcomes with folks. We see tenants staying housed much longer. We see them thriving. We see them achieving other goals that they want to achieve in their life. And so that's why it was excited to talk to you all today about it, because it really is exciting to know that more and more folks are interested in this and that we're building our community in terms of folks that we can work with and collaborate with as we see more and more supportive housing growing in our community. So we know, there's a lot of funding and dedication and funding and resources being dedicated to the development of more affordable housing as well as supportive housing. So very excited to know that folks want to do it and do it well by utilizing such a great process or evidence-based practice such as trauma-informed design. So that is the gist of it for us. When it comes from us, from our perspective, again, we are not architects, we're, consultants, trainers, and planners and providers. But what we really see trauma-informed design do for supportive housing is, again, like I said, it's building an environment that's really strength-based and supportive. It really does a great job of recognizing that trauma exists for all the folks that are going to be living there. And so trying to find ways to reduce the possibility of somebody being traumatized or being triggered, as well as making sure that we recognize, the physical environment does absolutely impact somebody's overall wellness. Their physical, psychological, and emotional safety is impacted by the stimuli in your environment, what you see all around you. And so making sure that we see trauma-informed design as a really great way to do that. And even more so, helping us empower and improve everything for our tenants. So that is it. And I'm just going to end with, the one statement that we know: supportive housing is solution. It actually works. And so, this is a basic statistic. This is not true for all. I know it's actually much higher for the project that Patrick worked on, that he'll talk about later in Denver. But on average, 80% of supportive housing tenants are able to maintain their housing for at least a year and beyond. And so we know when we use these quality measures, especially around design and the services, you couple that with the services, folks can stay housed. We've also seen a lot of evidence that it helps, reduce the costs overall to our community in terms of costs to send people to the emergency room and our other high cost systems. And we see that folks engage in services, and that's how they begin to thrive. So that was my presentation on supportive housing. I'll turn it over to Joanna, but thank you all for listening, and I will make sure you get copies of this too for the handout.
Thank you so much, Ariana. I really loved your presentation, and I really appreciate learning about the history of a practice, and particularly for supportive housing in vulnerable communities, because of course, I have worked in supportive housing buildings before. I've seen trauma-informed design impact clients and staff that work in those buildings, but I also really believe in this intervention overall. But we do have a couple of questions. And so if it's okay with you, and I think these questions can be answered by any of the panelists, so feel free if anyone wants to add anything. But our first question is from Lindsay, and she was asking about how to find supportive housing programs in the cities or states that they might exist in. They might know someone who needs this kind of intervention. How would they go about finding out more information where they live?
That is a great question. So specifically, well, it depends. Every city has a different supportive housing kind of body that operates it. It's usually run by a local jurisdiction that coordinates their overall list of the supportive housing projects that are available. So your local social, for here, Clark County Social Services Department has a unit dedicated to overseeing supportive housing, but it would either be through a local social service or housing department that could look at it. You can also contact CSH. We're across the country, and we're local here in Nevada. So you can also reach out to us if you want to get a specific contact, because it does vary by community and city. So, but we usually have the ability to make those connections for folks. That's my first instinctual response. I don't know if you would say something different, Joanna, but yeah.
No, I think that's right. It really depends on where you live. And
yeah.
Usually there's a point of entry for folks. If there's someone who's living outside and you want to get them into the housing system, there's usually some homeless service providers that can get the process started. So it just depends on where you are. The next question is there a percentage applied to the integrated model versus the 40% of the congregate model? And can you please clarify further the differences between these two forms?
Yeah, so for integrated, yes, it needs to be at least, we usually say at least 20-25% dedicated to supportive housing to be considered integrated. And so that's what we would consider integrated versus a complete 100% or at least 40% project-based. That's really the only major difference between those two models. Usually with a project-based, it really is established units that are dedicated towards that, and the majority are supportive housing, if not 100%. The difference with the integrated mix model is they are able to kind of decrease that, right? And so it can be about 25%. So if you have a building of 100 units, the idea is just at least at any given time, you have 25 units that can be assigned to or provided to somebody who qualifies for supportive housing. So all other 75 units would be somebody else coming in, paying rent on their own. Those 25 you would connect with a supportive housing project that pays the rental assistance, but also comes in and provides that supportive housing services.
Awesome. And the final question from Terrence says the program sounds great. Who pays for the cost differences if the project development, who pays for the cost differences in the project development and management costs? It sounds like it's all subsidized. Can you talk a little bit about how these kinds of projects are funded?
Yeah, that is like the fun part, because it usually is a very big combination. It's very hard to find one sole funder that can fund that. There are projects that may be funded primarily through, grants through a state behavioral health agency. A lot of projects in our state are funded through the continuums of care for homeless services through our HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department. And so they provide a lot of funding that subsidizes a lot of it. But what a lot of folks do also is they will apply for LIHTC. There's some set asides for LIHTC or LIHTC that you can also apply for to pay for those capital funds. And that's where we come in as a CDFI, and other CDFIs come in to fill some of those gaps for some of that funding so that they can get everything established in terms of the overall development of a project. But then ongoing, it usually is subsidized through, like I said, a HUD program or a local jurisdiction or grant to help pay for the ongoing operations of the building in itself. And then there's also additional grants and other funding that folks use to pay for the ongoing services. So it really usually is a mixture. I can give examples of what it looks like, but we've had single projects have like up to 10 different funding sources, all brought together to kind of pencil it all out. The challenge is with supportive housing, as you can imagine, just like any other apartment building, there are going to be costs, but there's additional costs when you want to build in additional features, especially around accessibility, but also and trauma-informed design, but also that ongoing cost of the support services to maintain the tenants and keep them supported, and then the overall maintenance of the building. But most of it is subsidized through grants, as well as project-based rental assistance projects through your housing authority or other housing departments that help support that overall.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Ariana, for talking about the history and the sort of development of trauma-informed design. One of the things that I find really interesting about it actually is that when we talk about it in the context of supportive housing and trauma-informed design, it really encapsulates a certain population. It feels like we're doing something really special. But when I go out and look for apartments, or I'm going into buildings or picking spaces to plan events, I'm also looking for design features that are going to encourage comfort and all the people that are going to be coming over to my house or coming to my events.
Right.
So it's really not all that different from what design is. But it just has these kind of specific sociological principles in mind because of the society that we live in and the different populations we serve. But what I think is so great about it is that we can really apply trauma-informed design principles to all kinds of different kinds of projects, right? And in some ways, we probably already do. We just don't call it trauma-informed design.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you, Joanna. Yeah, a lot of this is stuff we were doing, and I think this gives us a framework to do it, right?
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and, we have one more question asking if supportive housing includes individual homes. So have you ever heard of any models that are like individual houses or homeowner or owner occupied projects that are considered supportive housing? Yeah,
that would be for those tenant-based and scattered site projects that I talked about. So it's very rare, but you do see that sometimes. Granted, they have enough rental assistance to pay for renting out an entire home. They can do that. It's usually obviously with families, but we've seen people do fourplexes, duplexes as well. Again, it's the affordability component that's really important. And oftentimes, a single family home doesn't meet that threshold in terms of the how much not just the family can afford, but how much rental assistance is available for that family to pay for it. But yeah, it's rare, but it does happen more often. And what we see is more of that integrated or scattered site within other apartment buildings because they're renting out studios or one bedrooms or beyond a 2-bedroom is very rare, but those are usually for families.
And just to clarify, for supportive housing, the individuals who are, or the tenants are living in their own apartment, right? It's not a group home. It's not shared housing, no roommates.
No.
These are people with this is their own apartment, and services are available.
Yeah, the idea is it really should be their own unit. So they have their own kitchen, private dining, and bathroom space. And so the only other community spaces would be like a rec room or other spaces where they do workshops and stuff, but it would just be, their own individual unit, just like any other apartment.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about examples of supportive housing and see some of these trauma-informed design features in practice. So I'm going to introduce our next presenter. Patrick Lee is a design architect and senior associate with the Davis Partnership Architects in Denver, Colorado. After 7 years at a small architecture firm in Hamburg, Germany, Patrick moved to Denver in 1999 and began focusing on the design of affordable housing projects. Joining Davis Partnership in 2009 introduced him to healthcare architecture, where he utilizes attributes from both disciplines, influencing the evolution of trauma-informed design and permanent supportive housing. The project he's going to talk about today, Sanderson Apartments, is often touted as one of the first supportive housing projects to be developed with trauma-informed design, and really a prime example of integrating these features from pre-design into the development, which he's going to tell us about right now.
Thank you, Joanna. Can you hear me okay? All right, I will share my screen. All right, you seeing that? You see that? Yeah, okay. All right, so yes, thank you, Joanna. And like she said, this project is in Denver, Colorado. It is 60 units of 1 bedroom, 50,000 square feet, and 3 stories. It was developed by the Mental Health Center of Denver, and they provide the services as well. We started this in planning it in 2015. And at the time, like Joanna mentioned, there wasn't really a good reference of other trauma-informed design, permanent supportive housing projects that we knew of. So Mental Health Center of Denver has other housing projects, and they came to us and wanted to utilize principles of trauma-informed design to design this. And at the time, we weren't aware of really what that meant. We knew about trauma-informed care, but the design of the building, we did not understand. So working with them, we were able to come up with some principles of what trauma-informed design and what those characteristics of the building could be. And based on their experience, we developed this list, and I won't go into this right now because we'll go over these in detail in a minute. So I'll give you a little bit of context about the site. It's in an urban area, semi-urban area in Denver. It's located on a busy street. And so we started approaching this project, understanding that these have to be cost-effective projects. And what is the most cost-effective affordable housing? It's a double-loaded corridor project. So we started there, and looking at the site, it's on a corner site. So we're able to bend the building and start to think about the program that the client wanted. And one was this courtyard backyard. And so bending the building allowed us to have that. As we started to develop it further, the safe courtyard, I'll get to more detail on that in a minute as well, but that was a key component to the program. And so we want to locate that off of the main street, but that is an outdoor space open to the sky that is only accessed through the building, so for the residents only. And then one of the key things is the sight lines and observation from the main reception area. And so we splayed the building out to create wider than normal hallways to allow open sight lines down those areas. And in essence, those kind of moves started to inform what the overall form of the building would look like. And so some of our first diagram sketches, we wanted as we said, the sight lines are critical. And so the main reception area, which is manned 24/7, needs to have direct observation of those entrances. So we clustered the pink here are kind of our program spaces for amenities as well as staff areas. So clustering around those around the entrance areas as well as the reception. And it's in the corner of a building. And so one of the principles of the trauma-informed design is to maximize daylight. So because we were able to have or create what we did is we created a skylight over this 3-story space that became an open stair. It's not a required stair. Our 2 stairs are at the end of the building. So we were able to open that as much as possible. And that created this light well at the heart of the building. The other was the safe courtyard, and we wanted direct access from the building to the backyard area. And these are some floor plans, again, just showing the program. I won't go into detail on these, so that's too much for here, but they are included in the handout. So I wanted to mention that. Well, we missed one there. Oh, no, we didn't. So this again is a floor plan area. And again, just an overview of the characteristics of what those spaces are. So, you know, we have the safe courtyard as an amenity, community room, an event room, a fitness center, a library. So those are kind of the main amenity spaces on the ground level. When you get up to the second level, there are also a couple. We have a 2-story open space here. All these units are identical, which helped us save costs. And at the corner of a building, you always have to do a different type unit. So we didn't do them there, and that allowed us a 2-story open space. This is an overview of the unit, and I'll go into more detail here. So this is really starting to, at the unit level, what are those principles that we can incorporate here, and trying to eliminate the sense of confinement. And so this is a 1-bedroom unit. This is the door to the hallway, but when you come in, it's really open and bright. And there we elected not to put a door on the bedroom to help create those open sight lines for the resident as well as for any staff that may enter the unit. And then in the bedroom itself, well, actually between the living room and the bedroom, we cut the wall away here to, again, open those sight lines, but allow the bedroom that would typically have one window to share and borrow light from those other windows that are adjacent. And so now I'll go into more of the detail of each of the principles of trauma-informed design we came up with. And deinstitutionalization is one of the top ones, understanding again where the residents may have experienced some trauma, institutional buildings or some of them. So creating that home-like experience was a critical component. So this is the main entrance area. When you come in, the light well is here and the stair off to our right, but this is the reception, and you can see the open and bright spaces. This is another view of the reception here, and with a direct access to that stair and the light well. Creating a sense of community. And so, you know, interior and exterior spaces can do that. This is the library kind of lobby area right across from the reception area, shared library, windows out to the front porch, view down to the safe courtyard, which is through these windows back here. In the outdoor courtyard area, we have some raised planters. We have a sunken area that at the time we couldn't afford the gazebo as part of the project, but it got added later. So there's shade structure here. So all these indoor and outdoor spaces that allow multiple people to gather help encourage that, creating the sense of community. Fluid and open spaces to the right, you can see what I was talking about earlier with this not required stair that we were allowed to connect 3 stories and have a skylight at the top that encourages active use, but also provides those open sight lines. We elected to utilize 1/2-inch laminated glass at these areas to help prevent self-harm. But you were required a smoke curtain and a guardrail anyway. So for the same or less cost, we were able to get this nice, clean, open look. Looking open, but at the same time secure. It's a tricky thing to balance. We utilize quite a few interior windows. So example up in the upper left here, The staff offices are back in this area, and they have a little breakout space there. And so there are 2 interior windows that have views down the hallway, also to this little computer kiosk, as well as from the reception here. So further down as well are interior windows into the community room. Over to the upper right here, that's our safe courtyard, windows down the hallway. And a lot of times windows, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone behind the window. The sense of the glazing and the transparency creates that open and secure at the same time. Here is a look at the light well, and here you can see the wider hallway as we step those units out that open it up to, again, make it open and accessible. Colorful. We utilize the furniture in the community room to create the color, just a very simple band around the recessed soffit. Each floor has its own color, and what we did is we created these little porch entry elements at each unit. We pulled the LVT wood look flooring out into the hallway to kind of create that sense of arrival, but also sense of home to the individuals. And I mentioned maximizing daylight. This is that 2-story space we had in the corner of the building, which we intended to be an art room that they never really programmed that way. And now it's just a place where residents tend to gather and have breakfast. So it was a somewhat unprogrammed space that the residents chose and got to utilize it how they liked. In the units, when we stepped those units out to make the wider hallway, it gave us the opportunity to add another window in some of those units. Again, creating a corner window in units is a real bonus. And then again, this is a kind of picture of that light well and that 3-story open space on the right. Access to nature, right? It's not necessarily being in nature all the time, but it's the visual access to it. This is a view in that backyard courtyard area with the raised planters. Right through that little sally port, you can get to the safe courtyard. This is the event room, one of the amenity spaces where they have a kitchen that they can have pizza dinners and other community events. But this looks right out into that backyard area and to the basketball court. Nothing to create a feeling of confinement. I mentioned the unit and how we didn't put a door on the bedroom and cutting out that wall area there to help the spatial flow and feeling. But also in the required stairwells, we had windows, and in this case, usually at the bottom of the stair underneath the landing, it's just kind of a dark area that you wrap a guardrail around it to keep people out of. Well, in this instance, we brought the window down past the landing, so it lit the underneath of the stair and really maximized, I think, when you can in a required stair, that feeling of light and brightness. Clear circulation and wayfinding. As I mentioned, each floor has its own color, and so the ground floor with the green, the second floor with the eggplant, and the third floor with the pumpkin. And right when you come up the elevator or up the stair, you can see what floor you're on. And so again, the open sight lines help with that clear circulation and wayfinding as well. Mixing of seating and arrangement. So this is the event room I was talking about with that kitchen with the bar top area, or those cluster of small 4-top tables with views to the outside. To the right here is the front porch, which is ironically in the backyard. But really, when we're creating the building, we're like, what says home more than front porch? And as Ariana mentioned, when we started the project, our goal was to make it, why does it need to look any different than market rate or other affordable housing? And it really doesn't. You just have to be creative in the use of materials. We know we're going to use hardy board, stucco, a little bit of brick and metal panel, but as architects, that's our challenge to help design and create something that's economical as well. The variety of spaces and types and feelings. Again, we talked a little bit about the library, lobby, waiting area. but then the variety of spaces in the units, the seating area, this is the small kitchenette, the bedroom, and the bathroom off to the left. I didn't say about the unit. It is a efficient unit. It's only 440 square feet. Spaces that are conducive to autonomy and spontaneity. Again, the variety of sitting spaces outside. You can be alone, or you can be with a small group, or you can be with a big group. The image on the right is the community room, which has direct access to that safe courtyard. Again, giving the residents choice of what types of spaces they want to be in and who they want to be with. And then probably one of the, if not the most important, is the housing first model. Ariana mentioned a little bit about it, but we know the residents are coming with substance use issues. They have mental health issues, but they can't get over those without having a stable environment first. And that is the housing first model. And then, how are we on time? Do I have time to talk a little about lessons learned? Do we want to include that in the Q&A?
We're right at time, but we have about 3 questions. So if you want to talk a little bit about lessons learned, that's actually one of the questions. So
okay, well, I could talk a lot about, yes, I think the key lesson learned for this was providing sightline stall exit and entrances. When we made that safe courtyard, because of the program, we ended up turning the building a little bit and creating more of a C shape than an L shape. That put one of the stairs out of that direct visual sight line of the reception. And this door tends to get propped open. It's a troublesome location. So in subsequent projects, we have made sure that the reception can see every entry and exit point to the building. Another one is, residents in their units, sometimes they break the windows, but they don't just break the window, they actually break the frame. And so a nail flange type window is difficult to replace. So in subsequent projects, we're using replacement style windows. We weren't able to talk to the residents about what they wanted as far as amenities in the building, but in this case, the outdoor kind of raised planting beds aren't utilized. There is a high retention rate since the building opened 5 years ago at 97%. The durable finishes. So this building is almost 5 years old. When I went there recently, it looked like it did on the day it opened. So the durable finishes, they're available. You can get them cost effectively, and they wear well. So to make sure that the building can look what it looks. To maintain its look is critical. A little bit about the MEP. One of the lessons learned before we started the project from Mental Health Center Denver is residents tend to mess with PTAC type units or water heaters in the unit. So more of a centralized system is better. We put a fan coil above the ceiling of the bathroom, and that's the only mechanical equipment in there, and it's worked well. The safe courtyard, that'll be my last point. That became a critical piece, because when somebody goes from homelessness to moving into a unit, it's not always an easy direct transformation or transition. And so that safe courtyard, residents would sleep out there at times. So they need a space that is familiar, that they can utilize and feel safe. And that is an amenity that we include in all of our other projects. Permanent supportive housing projects. So I'll leave it there, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I definitely have some questions, but we have a lot of questions from the attendees, so I'll hold mine. Edward is curious about what the total project cost and what the cost per door was.
Yeah, so the total project cost was $10.4 million. It worked out to about $208 a square foot, and that works out to about $175,000 per unit. Now that is 2017 dollars, but it was competitive with all the other projects we're going to for tax credit funding in Colorado that year.
Do you know if or how people have been using the spaces since it opened?
Yes, so all the amenity spaces are getting used. interestingly, the fitness room gets used the least. The community room with the TVs and watching Broncos games, sometimes maybe not Broncos, but watching football or other sport events has been well used. The kitchen when they have pizza nights in the event room has been well used. Like I mentioned, they kind of took over that art space as a breakfast and game room. So yeah, all the amenity spaces have been used.
I think the fitness center probably is the least used feature of all apartment buildings. How many tenants per unit typically?
So this was one person per unit. So there's 60 individuals at this particular project.
They're studio apartments.
They are 1 bedroom. So due to funding, the Mental Health Center Denver needed them to be 1 bedroom units, and we had HUD funding. And so we went to HUD to confirm with them that not putting a door on there and cutting out that bit of wall, would they still classify this as a 1 bedroom unit? And yes, they do.
Awesome. How does the no bedroom door affect the situation? That was the next question.
I haven't heard any detractions from not having a door since a single occupant use. I know just from being in the unit that it feels much more open than if we had a door on there. I haven't heard of any instances where residents asked for a door. We did design it, so if doors need to be added, they could, but they've not added any doors.
And you said it's 1 tenant per unit, so it's single. That program serves single adults. Correct.
Yes, and there's I'd say the majority are male, but there are some female residents as well.
Awesome. Anna's asking if the window breaking was was operationally or intentionally. If it was
no, no, that was intentional, and I don't know the details of why that happened, but it happened multiple times.
Oh.
And so replacing one of those nail flange type windows is tricky. I haven't heard of it happening recently. It's just a behavioral issue that a resident or a few had for some reason.
Got it. So it was kind of isolated to certain behavioral issues rather than being like a thing that happens continuously, like you're having to replace the windows continuously.
That's correct. It's an isolated incident, but we're planning for that it could happen again in the future in another project.
Got it. Have you, what are the alternatives you found for windows that without making it feel institutional? That is kind of a tricky balance when you need to put in certain features to sort of prevent or to anticipate certain behavioral problems, but you want to still maintain the feel of a market rate apartment versus going sort of hardcore institutional.
Yeah, so this project, we utilized the Anderson 100 series windows. They are slider windows, but we put limiters on them, so they're only able to open 4 to 6 inches. But those, white vinyl windows used to be the kind of the namesake of affordable housing. But the Anderson series, the Fibrex, they are more expensive than vinyl, but we felt it was worth the trade-off, and you can get different colors.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen that in other supportive housing projects too, the windows only opening a certain amount, or especially in buildings that are serving the severe and persistent mental illness, because there was a lot of stuff going out of the window.
Right.
Yeah. Is cooking allowed within the units or just in the common kitchen area and dining space?
Cooking is allowed in the unit. So the kitchen has a convection microwave as well as a 2-top electric burner, one of the ceramic kind of flat tops, not the exposed coils. But we did put it on a 15-minute timer, I believe. So to operate it, you have to turn the timer on. At other projects, they just had residents leave the burners on all the time. So we helped that situation with the timer.
How was sound abatement addressed?
Sound abatement? We're meeting the STC requirements that are required by the building code. Nothing over that.
And what would you say to those who are who see the design as non-traditional or non-home-like or institutional and modern looking?
No, it's an interesting comment. I haven't heard it. I haven't heard anybody call the building institutional. I would like to talk to them about what they find about it institutional, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
And is public transportation and shopping available on the site?
There is a bus stop within 2 blocks of the site. That Federal Boulevard is a very busy, and it's a commercial corridor, that area.
Awesome. And then Monica commented on the garden becoming a temporary sleeping space, which I think you mentioned, right? That some folks would sleep outside in the common area.
In the safe courtyard, yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and really is a good example of the function of trauma-informed design for folks that are like really getting at the crux of the function of it. Awesome. What was the total tax credit for this project? And how many residents have cars, or a general percentage of people with cars?
So I don't know the tax credit amount for the project. The cars, 0 residents have cars. They all have bikes. That's a struggle we've gone through with in the city of Denver, particularly with these type of projects. They get burdened with, we had to build 37 spaces. That was with a parking reduction. And so, you know, those site development costs burden projects when we don't need them. There has been progress in the meantime that for these type of projects, we have 0.1 per unit parking required now.
And I'll take one more question before we move to the next presentation. Are there sustainability goals that are meaningful to the residents?
It's a good question. I don't know if there's sustainability goals that are meaning to the residents. I do know the residents, a group of them got together and they liked the way the building looked so much that they created a little cleaning crew of the 4 of them that would go around and just sweep and take care of place. And that evolved into a third-party company hiring them as caretakers of or janitorial staff for the project. That's
amazing. I love that. That's really awesome. And I'll get ready for the next presentation, but one final question. What would change if couples were allowed in the building?
What would change if couples were allowed? I assume maybe from a unit size, the unit may need to get a little bigger than the 440 square feet. It's a good question. I don't know if any of the amenity spaces would change, but what would be great is to be able to ask the residents prior to the design or during the design phase to ask them how they would like to occupy and what amenities they'd like to see.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. That was a really great presentation, great examples, and a beautiful building. I'd love to introduce our next presenter, Amanda Donofrio. She is a principal at BDA Architecture and Planning, which she joined in 2010 after relocating from Chicago to Eugene, Oregon. With years of experience designing affordable housing in both Illinois and Oregon, her most recent project focus has been leading the permanent supportive housing project. Amanda is also the go-to for accessibility questions within the office and enjoys discussing the ways to go beyond code depending on the population served in her housing project. Take it away, Amanda.
Realized I need to unmute myself first, and then I can start the slideshow. All right, can you guys see just my PowerPoint? Or are you seeing my cute little son and cat in the background too?
I also see your cute little son and cat.
All right, thank you. Here we go. All right, how's that looking?
Perfect.
All right. So I am Amanda Donofrio from BDA Architecture and Planning, as Joanna introduced. We are a small firm of 6 people located in Eugene, Oregon, and we have specialized in multifamily affordable housing since our inception in 1996. So today, I'm going to talk to you about the Commons on MLK and the NEL, which I consider to be sort of sibling projects located in Eugene, Oregon. The Commons on MLK was the first that we started design on in the fall of 2018, after the state of Oregon made a prioritization shift in their LIHTC program and started prioritizing the funding of permanent supportive housing as a way to address our state's homelessness crisis. So as you heard earlier from Ariana, the permanent supportive housing is pairing on-site supportive services with residential dwelling units. And the Commons on MLK was actually the first single site housing first model project in Lane County. It was the first our firm did, so it meant there was a lot of learning on my end that needed to be done about how this would be different than all of the affordable housing projects in our portfolio previously. And then, as I mentioned, the NEL came right on the heels of the Commons on MLK. We actually submitted that project in January of 2021 for a building permit right as the Commons on MLK was completing construction and was going to start lease up. So the NEL in many regards is intentionally very similar to the Commons on MLK because we've done so much research to inform MLK, but the building wasn't in service, so we couldn't learn a lot of lessons from it. But we were able to make some changes in moderation during construction to respond to things that we kept hearing from our owner, and I'll talk about a few of those today. But when we were working on the design of MLK in the fall of 2018, we had met with service providers who'd introduced the concept of trauma-informed care to us and then asked how this building could be trauma-informed. I had no idea. And so this was actually a question that I had shared with Christina below, who you will hear from later today, so that we could dig a little bit deeper. So, Ariana did a really good job of talking through trauma-informed care, but the root of everything we've done comes back to this. So I need to give it a little time as well. And so this model is aiming to provide a sense of safety and empowerment. And so we recognized, without knowing what trauma-informed design meant at the time, that the building was going to need to support this mission for the residents who've experienced previous trauma and the staff whose role it was to be available to those residents. And so in order to incorporate trauma-informed care into the design of a building, we were trying to understand what design elements may be triggers for trauma and to understand the mental health impacts of our design choices. So we'd attempted to make design decisions that would minimize stress and increase feelings of safety. And most importantly, we engaged with people who had lived experience of homelessness to provide perspective on how to respond to the trauma of long-term homelessness in our design. Because the more you learn about trauma-informed care, the more you understand that that process is tenant-led. And so in order for our design to be trauma-informed, we really felt it was important to include these representative voices. So when we were trying to understand what trauma-informed design was about 4 years ago, there was not a lot available. We found Sanderson Apartments as a precedent, and so it's wonderful to hear Patrick talk about it because it was, as pointed out earlier, one of the only projects built that we could learn from as a precedent. And then Christina and I found these principles of trauma-informed design that were specifically created for temporary shelter spaces. So we were looking at them and thinking about how we could adapt these to think about permanent supportive housing. So we took these principles and applied them to our design and then established a series of replicable patterns that you can consider when designing. The first of these is to connect common area spaces with interior windows for safety. And so all of the residential common areas feature either an interior light or glazing in the entry door, because when we allow residents to see inside of a room before they enter, it allows for the choice to understand what's happening inside of a room and the choice to engage or not enter, and this can help reduce anxiety. This is also going to allow staff to take stock of situations inside of rooms and consider how to engage so that we can ensure safety for both staff and residents. At both the Commons on MLK and the NEL, we provided for multiple types and sizes of common areas, but with flexible programming. Each building has a lounge, which has a TV, library, games, and there's a separate community room that also has a TV, but hosts art therapy, yoga. There's the cooking kitchen for nutritional discussions, a place where people find coffee on a daily basis and food donations. There's a separate computer lab space that is not inside of either of these common rooms. And when we were designing this building, it was really intentional for us to put all of this common area on the ground floor so that we could bring people out of their small studio units to activate this part of the building, allowing for, you know, casual interaction with other residents as well as staff. And it allows for that trust to start to build between staff and residents in a casual manner. But we felt like it was really important to make sure that there was some relief on the upper floors, so that people that weren't really ready to come down to the first floor could still watch other people or engage with other people up on the residential floors. And so each elevator lobby has this small nook located near the lobby. So providing common areas that maximize resident choice. We talked about that inside of the building. And when we understand the importance of access to nature, particularly as people who've experienced chronic homelessness or transitioning into housing, a secure outdoor courtyard was a critical element of our. So this same pattern can also be applied to those outdoor spaces. And so our courtyard design is including outdoor rooms. There's the choice to sit under cover or not. There are garden beds. There's a water feature at the Commons on MLK. The Nell is actually on a more urban site in Eugene, while the Commons on MLK is located on Lane County's behavioral health campus. And so at that building, it felt like a really nice option to create a front porch for another opportunity to be outside and connect with nature and still have this kind of buffer between public space before we enter the building. Supplying a visible central third stair to encourage engagement between residents and staff. When we were talking with people with lived experience, we had heard that crevices or spaces that feel dark and shadowy, including stairwells, can trigger previous trauma. So these could have been predatory places for people in their history, and we knew that even our stairwells needed to be safe and appealing. So we aim to provide clear sight lines within each stairwell and included windows at each level landing and intermediate landing to bring natural light in and provide views back to the outside. Each stair door has a vision light, and at the third and central stair, we were able to include these large windows that allow people to easily see who's coming and going before they're entering the stairwell. And then this third stair is open at the ground floor to further encourage use and enhance the feelings of safety by not enclosing it at the main level. So designing future opportunities for resident personalization, self-reliance, and identity expression. A key question you ask is, how can you incorporate tenant voice in a new construction building? We don't know who our residents are going to be. So when we designed the Commons on MLK, we were able to engage a local lived experience user group. They're called League, and they're actually part of our poverty and homelessness board at the city level. And so they were engaged with us during schematic design and provided feedback on schematic design. And so when it came to actually, color selection, furniture selection for this building, we wanted to re-engage that group and bring tenant voice or representative voice into those selections. And so a survey was actually the tool that group had recognized recommended would be the best method of getting feedback from them. And that included like color palettes, as well as the extent of color in spaces and feedback on furniture. And when it came to the Nell, we were able to utilize resident feedback from the Commons on MLK and further improve the Nell. And one of the important things that came out of those sessions is that as many places as I thought I was applying accent paint at the Commons on MLK and incorporating color, we still heard that there was a lot of white, and that felt institutional for people. And so when it came to the Nell, we started to introduce more subtle neutrals throughout the building. You can see that on the photo on the right, just to respond to that feedback and try to make spaces a little less dark. So including 2 exits from spaces that host one-on-one staff and resident interactions. This is the pattern that is most commonly requested by property management and asset management representatives during our design phases. And that's partly because, they do not necessarily have the same level of, they absolutely don't have the same level of trauma-informed training as a service provider. And sometimes the best thing you can do is know when to safely remove yourself from a situation before it escalates. And so we think of this as designing for de-escalation. Providing 2 doors to office spaces does require a lot of consideration about furniture placement and accessibility. So creating a welcoming entry and considering access control. From the very beginning at the Commons on MLK, we were talking about how entering this building should feel welcoming. They were planning for a staffing model with 24/7 presence and wanted to provide an open reception area. And then that reception area needed to be located to have eyes on the front door, on the elevator lobby door, on the hallway to the courtyard. And that it also needed to have a visual cue, to separate, make sure, I think you can see my cursor here, that residents understood that, this space is for staff and this space is for residents, to increase that feeling of safety for staff as well. When we talk about a trauma-informed environment, service provider burnout is real. And so we are actually trying to create the very best environment for both residents and their providers so everybody can succeed. And so, just a little physical, swinging door was enough to make somebody feel safer to do their job behind that desk. And, all while trying to make this space do a lot of work. One of the unintended consequences of this location related to our access control is we've got, all of these doors are controlled by key fobs because we're really trying to make sure that, people aren't getting into the building that shouldn't be there. And, residents were coming out into the lobby trying to just go straight out the front door. We've got this really great straightforward circulation. And if there were any, incidents or altercation happening in this space, it made it so people didn't feel like they could actually get out of the lobby. So that was one of the items of feedback. I absolutely felt like that was a really sufficient space, that it was pretty spacious. I was surprised to get that feedback, but that was one item that during the NEL, we were able to hear that concern and respond to adding a separate exit out of the mail lobby that is an exit only door. No one can enter through it, but just if you came out into this space and somebody is over here talking to the property manager, you can, head out this side door. And just, again, taking that element of spatial choice, even in circulation, to another level. With the NEL, we actually knew right from the get-go that this was not going to be staffed 24/7. And so there was no plans for a reception area. So what we did instead is put the property manager right by the front door and included a transaction window that they can leave open. They can hear who's coming and going. They can see who's coming into the building and going straight into that elevator lobby. And it's there in case anybody just wants to check in. So the next item is to design wide corridors and break down the scale of long, disorienting corridors. We have all been there with a long L-shaped building and trying to make a corridor not feel like a long white a strip of doors. So we did a couple things in these corridors. We've got something that's a little bit wider. We went with 7 feet, something that's allowing for social interaction. It's allowing for easier passing of people so that, again, you feel a little bit more comfortable in your space. And then we started to incorporate some smaller scale articulation that it's doing a little bit more work in this building than it does in the NEL, but the big job that it is actually doing is to break down into sort of little residential pods. We've got 3 or 4 doors between each of these bumps in the hallway, and it allows us a place to use color for wayfinding, which is, as Patrick had shown, we did the same thing, distinctive colors per floor. this is a housing first model project. People may or may not still be using substances, and just wanting to make it as easy as possible for you to know that you're on your home floor. And so I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Those are both really beautiful buildings. I worked in 2 buildings in Seattle, and this building really reminds me of the one of the supportive housing buildings that I worked in Seattle. And I wanted to, so we have a couple of questions, but I wanted to highlight because I think in the design features, because we're talking about vulnerable populations or populations that, folks that have behavioral health issues or substance issues, we talk so much about safety, but one of the things that, when I was a case manager in the buildings, that all these open sight lines and windows and views did, not only did they really create a sense of safety for the residents because they have history of trauma, so they don't necessarily want to be in dark corners, but they also made it really easy for me to engage with my clients, even if they didn't sometimes it takes a long time for clients who are coming in out of a lifetime of homelessness, often generational homelessness, to want to engage with another service provider because they've been disappointed. There's a lot of turnover in homeless services. They have to meet a new person every 5 minutes. They have to tell their story every 5 minutes. And so it would take a lot of work for some of my clients to engage with me. And one of the things that those kinds of the community spaces, the big windows, the office spaces that are open, but you can make them private if you need to do case notes, but you can keep them open when you want to engage. As I was able to pretty consistently catch people going in and out of the building if they didn't want to answer their door when I was outreaching, or if they didn't want to engage, come to community events that we were organizing. And it really made a huge difference in building rapport over time. It really accelerated the process for me. So I know we often think about design in these buildings in terms of safety and making sure that everybody can see everything and keeping access to the building safe. But really what I'm thinking about is when one person I haven't been able to engage with is sneaking behind my office to try and get out because they know I'm going to chase after them, but I have this big window so I can see where they are. And I'm like, hey, I have some candy for you.
Well, and it's that casual interaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the big idea about even bringing people down to the ground floor is just allowing that to happen, that, you see someone passing by, and just so many visual connections that, for good and bad, right? I appreciate that you put the positive spin on it, because it's true, with the laundry room, I think I'd heard that some of the weirdest things happen in laundry rooms. And so we have so many big interior lights in our laundry rooms so that people can see who's coming and going, and co-locating that with the lounge. And you're like, oh, Bob's going in there and he's going to get, he's going to throw his wash in the dryer now. And then maybe he'll come out and watch TV with me. And
yeah, definitely. It's fun and it is fun to have that common area where people are going through, because if you are having a community event, people can kind of they don't have to opt in fully. They just got to peek in and see what's going on and then decide.
It's that empowerment of choice.
Mm-hmm.
We're just not, and it has to come through in the design. And yeah.
It's really nice to see these examples paired and think about my experience as a case manager to really fully understand the intention behind them. So I really appreciate this presentation. We'll get to some questions. First question is, why did the vanity have a transom window?
Why did the vanity have a transom window? What are we talking about there? Was it one of my...
It came earlier in your presentation, so maybe there was a slide that had a picture.
I think that comment came in when you were showing the pictures of the laundry.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so why did the and that is, so that is the laundry room sink. Thank you, Christina. So that's the laundry room sink. And that actually relates right back to what I had just said, that service providers, when we were talking to them originally at the Commons on MLK, had just said that, it's a couple things. One is that some of the weirdest things happen in the laundry room. And so if we can just have a lot of visual connection between the corridor and the lounge into that space. And then the other thing is, we're talking about people coming out of chronic homelessness, and your possessions, what little you have, are really important to you. And so making sure that, especially if you're, we've co-located the laundry next to the lounge, so you can wait there. You don't have to sit in the laundry room. You can sit there and play games and read a book, but you can see when you're in that space who's coming in and out of the laundry room, and know that your belongings are in there. And, especially if it's somebody, you have a better idea what's going on where your items are concerned.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Daniel is asking if the hallways are noisy.
You know, I haven't heard them, I haven't gotten any feedback on that. I will say that, you know, and we do a lot of multifamily housing, and we use a lot of acoustical ceiling tile. And so, you know, like Patrick was talking about earlier, obviously, when it comes to our dwelling units, we're focusing on the required IIC and STCs required of our walls and our floor ceiling assemblies. When it comes to the corridors, you know, just recognizing that the corridor walls are doing that work. And then we've brought an acoustic ceiling tile in to kind of deal with some of that.
How has the expansion of Amazon parcel deliveries affected your design of mail or parcel room?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Do you know that they now require you to provide like a parcel box for every 5 mail slots? Like that's a lot. But the thing is with this building, you know, we have a lot of parcel boxes, and that's actually just because it's a elevator served building, and all of our mailboxes are below the reach range. And once you use that, you know, this is such a geeky thing. Thank you, AIA, for being willing to talk to me about this one. But you know, once you've got this off Florence AI or ADA 10 box series, you've got 2 parcel boxes. And so we haven't heard anything about, you know, not having enough parcel boxes. And then I must presume that the reception desk at MLK is taking things and property management's taking them if they're too big. That's my best guess.
Yeah, that was always a big issue between case managers and property managers and reception. They didn't want to be responsible for packages, and I was like, you have to.
I have not gotten any feedback on that. So it's really interesting. I've gotten a lot of feedback, but nothing about even needing like a parcel room or anything.
Yeah, I think generally they just grab, because once you build relationships with all the tenants and you know everybody, it really becomes like, the supportive housing buildings become more, there's more of a neighborly sense of community than in any place I've ever lived, any of my apartment buildings. It's like really everybody knows everybody, and we're all hanging out together a lot. Are there cameras on each floor or issues with
yes.
doorway bump out or hiding?
I was gonna say cameras. There are more cameras in these 2 buildings than any other project I've ever worked on. I was told if you think you need a camera, put it there. If you don't think you need a camera, put it there. And, you know, like the intermediate landings of our stairwells have cameras. So that is like, you know, Christina and I have talked a lot about like this sort of sense of surveillance, yet trying to create a sense of home, right? Because we're trying not to make these feel like institutional buildings, and we're trying not to surveil people, but at the same time, we're trying to enhance the feeling of safety by providing the opportunity for observation. There was another piece of that question, though, that wasn't just about cameras. I launched right into cameras.
Any issues with doorway bump out or hiding?
No, you know, those bump outs in the hallway are like no more than a foot deep. And so they were intentionally created to just really not make any sort of hidey spaces for people, because we just absolutely didn't want any spaces where it felt like people could hide.
Ultimately, what is the timeline goal for someone to stay here before moving on to something better?
Permanent.
Permanent.
This is home, as long as somebody needs it. But what's interesting is when we'd visited some other properties, you know, especially as people are coming, as people are stabilizing. And I will say, you know, when we were working on MLK, we were able to go to other cities and visit some projects. And, you know, I remember a resident coming up to me after living there for 2 years, and he was ready to move on, but he couldn't quite yet. And it was really hard for him where he was at in his in his journey to still be living with people that were coming in and were still using. And so the reality, though, is we're trying to make a place that people feel supported and stabilized and safe in for as long as they want to stay there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is kind of, you know, this is a really important intervention. And I think but just like anything else, there can be, you know, things that are imperfect. But one of the things that I saw at Plymouth Housing Group, where I worked in Seattle, is they developed buildings that were called Housing Options Program buildings, so HOP buildings, and they were basically a next level. Like if a client was stabilized, were stabilizing and moving on, and maybe didn't need the same level of intensive case management after living at the building for several years, there was this option to move into a new building that was, there was not 24-hour staff. It was just a higher level of stability, not as much programming either, right? So not as much community programming because the staff wasn't on site 24/7, but it was an option for people who are maybe just didn't need the same level of services, didn't need the nurse on site, didn't need intensive case management or 24-hour staffed building. And I thought that that was a nice option. It's, it really gets at having an option, housing options for all people, right? So this is one intervention and then we need kind of all the interventions to work together to really end homelessness.
Yeah, Joanna,
yeah.
Can I just add too, that's where the mixed models or integrated models come into place too, because people can transition in place. They could stay in their unit, but the services can just go away. Because affordability is also a major issue for folks. Yeah.
Yeah. Often even the folks who are ready to maybe don't need that level of services are still on a disability, so still can't pay market rate rent and move on to something else. They have very small SSI checks. So that is nice. The moving into other subsidies or often people get in line for Section 8 vouchers also, or housing authority vouchers, and will move out of the buildings in that way once they're ready. And the case managers help with that kind of readiness and help with that transition as well. And they stay connected after they move out too. So it's kind of like a seamless transition.
Right.
The Nell street level windows seem to be a problem. Were there any alternative designs considered?
This is the moment where I'm like, what do you mean they're a problem? I haven't heard they're a problem. In fact, I mean, the Nell has it's a really urban corner. That building is in downtown Eugene, and so there is a lot of visual connection between the mail lobby by using storefront in that lobby to the outdoors. And what's really lovely about it is, as you can actually see, where the property management company has brought in a lot of plants and actually just really greened up the inside of that space. And then, I don't quite know why they're a problem. I haven't gotten any feedback that they are.
Does the building have an automatic fire sprinkler system?
Oh, yes. And NFPA 13 in the Nell, the version of the code for MLK was still the 2014 version of the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, which had allowed us to do a combination of a 13 on the first floor and a 13R above and still be able to do the open stair, or at least that third stair being open to the ground floor. The update to 2019, which had reflected IBC's 2018 code, actually sent us down a different code path. And so we sprinkled the whole building to NFPA 13 fire, right? Like Patrick was talking about with the range timers, that's something we incorporated. There are these stovetop fire suppression devices that are installed at each range hood. We are just trying to help mitigate potential fire damage all the way from the range hood and the range up to the fire suppression system and fire alarm system you would expect in a 4-story building.
There are a couple more questions, but I want to make sure Christina has enough time for her presentation. So Amanda, would you mind going in and answering the questions?
Oh, in the chat.
And we can get started with Christina's presentation. I just want to make sure there's enough time. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was really awesome. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Christina Bolo. She's a licensed architect in Washington and Illinois and teaches design and applied theory courses focused on health and well-being in the built environment at University of Illinois. Her research investigates the role of housing policy in shaping housing design and the role of housing design in health and well-being of residents. On a side note, Christina also designed the very first supportive housing building I ever worked in, Humphrey House in the Belltown neighborhood of Seattle. And a lot of her research focuses on Plymouth Housing, or was done at Plymouth Housing Group, where I worked for many years in Seattle. So I'm really excited about this presentation. It's all you, Christina.
Thanks, Joanna. It's bringing us full circle. The other connection that I have that you might have heard a little bit as Amanda was talking is Amanda and I met when I was in Eugene, Oregon, and starting out my housing research career, and we stayed connected. And so as she started with MLK and Nell, I was able to kind of feed her research. Sometimes a lot of academic research is beyond a paywall, and so frequently architect friends from earlier in my career have asked me for articles. And if you have those of you in the audience, if you're looking for research on architecture and you can't find it, it may be behind that academic paywall, and you should reach out to your friendly professor at UNLV, for example. So I was working as an architect for many years in Oakland and Seattle, designing affordable housing. And Plymouth Housing Group in Seattle was one of my biggest clients. I worked with them on several buildings, including the Humphrey House, as Joanna mentioned. And so when I became a housing researcher and became an architecture professor, I wanted to continue focusing on that building type. One reason I stopped practicing full time was that I had so many questions about how the buildings were working after they were completed. And as an architect, I never really had time to stop and to slow down and to look at a bunch of buildings at the same time. So a lot of that research comes from this. So when Amanda started talking to me about trauma-informed design and asking questions, a lot of them I couldn't answer. And I started doing a little bit of digging, and I learned that Plymouth Housing Group had, after I had left Seattle, had done some very, very, very small and influential trauma-informed renovations of common areas in some of their older buildings. So Plymouth started out renovating former SROs and residential hotels in Seattle as an organization. So not doing new construction right away, but renovating buildings like you see on the screen right now. And what they became interested in 2018, 2019 was doing these small scale renovations of the common areas to create spaces that were more beneficial to the residents. And so they created a tenant-led program to allocate $5,000 for each building. The tenants formed a committee at each building, a trauma-informed design committee, to look at what aspects of the building they wanted to improve, focusing again solely on the common areas, not looking at the units at all. So the projects I'll present now are the smallest scale, the ones you've just seen. They're very, very low budget, but they've mostly because they were tenant-led, because there were these committees at each building, the results are really powerful for the residents and for the staff in each of these buildings. So on the left is the Scargo Lewiston apartments in the Belltown neighborhood. In the middle is the St. Charles apartments. You can see, if you know Seattle, Smith Tower, right downtown, kind of almost to Pioneer Square. And then in the downtown core, just a couple blocks from Pike Place Market, is Plymouth on Stewart on the right-hand side. And all of these were renovated in the last 30 years or so. But then the renovations I'm talking about, the small scale ones, are just within the last few years. There we go. So first, just kind of introducing you to the buildings. This is Plymouth on Stewart. This is the first floor plan. You enter into a small entry kind of court. It's outside, but off the street. Enter through a main door here. And then all of this is kind of lobby area, reception area. And on the first floor, this is the only common area in the dark blue color. So the colors are going to be the same on all the slides, so you can see what type of common area they are. Then the bulk of the common areas for this particular building are downstairs. In the light blue is a huge common area room that was a little bit undifferentiated before the trauma-informed renovations in 2018. And then the yellow color is the supportive service offices. So these are the offices that when residents have an appointment with a social worker, this is where they come to have that appointment. So all fully below grade, no daylight at all. The only daylit room is on the first floor. At the Scargo Lewiston, this is a combined building with there's a connection of the corridors, if you can see my cursor, between the two buildings that have been connected. Again, this very small outdoor vestibule, it is right off the street, right off the property line. And then some lobby space, reception area, a lot of supportive services down a corridor off of that hallway off the lobby. And then you go all the way back to the back of the building on the alley, and there's one large common area room. There's also a small kitchen, which is kind of a teaching kitchen with multiple sinks and stoves for residents to learn to cook. And Amanda and I both visited these buildings in 2019. Right, Amanda? Yes. Okay, 2019. And then when we asked for the floor plans, we learned that what was supposed to be a tenant common room back here was now storage. So a little lesson learned there is how much storage is needed in large multifamily buildings, and how if we don't design for it, it will we'll lose some other room we did design. So looking out for those storage needs, because they're quite acute in buildings for many reasons related to tenants moving out, tenants passing away, and other building storage needs. Finally, the St. Charles, again, you walk in on level 1 to a large lobby, reception area, and then go down a stair to the main tenant common room in the basement. A couple offices down there for social services. Again, you see a big room that now says now storage on it in red, because that originally was going to be a common area for residents, and it's been converted. And then a laundry room on that floor as well. So both the St. Charles and Plymouth on Stewart were really hampered by the fact that there was very little common area upstairs compared to what was in the basement. And I think this was one of the concerns and one of the reasons that these 3 buildings were chosen for these interventions, trauma-informed design interventions. Some of these principles you've seen in Amanda's, and I know it's these are common principles. What we were trying to do is we developed some patterns for trauma-informed design is to combine 2 or more of the principles in each. So you'll kind of see on the left these changing as I show you the slides, but this is kind of the touch point for me is these design principles that we adapted from the Center on Temporary Shelter in Vermont, and then the design resources for homelessness at the University of Florida. If you're starting to do this type of work, I highly recommend that website. They have a lot of resources there, though they tend to be really East Coast focused, whereas the work that we've been doing has been more in the West. So the 4 patterns that I'll talk about today in the context of these buildings, some of them you saw from Amanda as well, but I'm going to show them in this much kind of lower scale context. So I'm just going to move through those quickly. So this idea of providing multiple common areas to maximize resident choice, this is something that we actually learned from studying Sanderson closely and seeing compared to other permanent supportive housing projects, how many different options there are for residents at Sanderson as compared to other buildings, and realizing how connected that is to the trauma-informed care idea of choice. And so this pattern, fine, you're starting a new construction building, it's easy to understand how this would work. But we saw evidence in the renovations as well. The main room, this is at Scargo, the main community common area room off the alley. The tenants asked for it to be divided up into smaller areas, that areas close to the daylight would be designed for puzzles and other high daylight need activities, that there would be a separate area with the television, and that the television wouldn't be part of the whole entire room. It wouldn't be the focus, but people could watch TV in one section, but be able to do other activities at the same time. So this idea of zoning, very intentionally zoning common areas, even in a renovation, so that multiple residents can be in the same space, have those casual interactions we've been talking about all afternoon, but also have a bit of quiet and privacy for the different types of activities that might occur in these really constrained spaces. At Plymouth on Stewart, as they did this, the residents there really wanted games. So it's really interesting, right? We kind of think everybody at every building is exactly the same, and it can be easy to kind of homogenize the resident population, but each building has its own its own culture, right? That just as any apartment building does. And Plymouth on Stewart really wanted games of different kinds. And so much of their budget went again into activating the space, those large basement undifferentiated spaces I showed, really activating them with different games that multiple people could play at the same time. So fostering connections between the residents and getting people into the common areas and out of their apartments, which are quite small actually in this particular building. This is the plan here, and the games I just showed you were here. And then in the next, I believe in the next picture, yeah. So the games are over in this zone toward the south, and then toward the north, there's a kitchen, and they added some vending machines, again, based on the resident focus group, and tried to make kind of a food and drink centered area over on that other side. So even though it's just one big long room with no acoustic separation whatsoever, the residents wanted there to be a different feel in each of those spaces. So here, looking the opposite direction as the little basketball game and the tiny pool table, some other, vending machines, books, and things like that on the other side. So trying to figure out how to zone things using furniture, using these, using things that are very lively, right? That bring people toward them, like the machines and the games, and having that draw to these spaces. This is the basement common area at the St. Charles, and the residents at the St. Charles were particularly interested in the lighting. They were really concerned that they didn't have any control over their lighting. There was no perceived control over the lighting. They wanted to be able to have small lights throughout the space. They liked the cozy feel of the basement. This is actually a very popular common area room. It didn't need any activation like the ones at Plymouth on Stewart did. There was a TV. People tended not to fight over the TV in this particular building. So it was a well-loved room, but they felt like it wasn't cozy, and they felt like they had no control over the multi-sensory elements. And so when I was looking at this, I filed this design pattern under future opportunities, because we may not know when we're designing a building what the culture of the building will be like and what people will want. So being able to design agency, especially for things like lighting, maybe even for temperature, ventilation, airflow, and making sure that that's something that can be changed later on as people move into the building and the building has its own life. So in this case, finding opportunities to put smaller scale lights that the residents had full control of in a really non-institutional way. And then this is that same room, another direction, and these are the lights that they didn't feel like they can control, and they're horrible fluorescent lights. They're magnetic ballasts. They flicker all the time, and on top of that, not being able to turn them on and off. This was a number one in the St. Charles Trauma Informed Focus Group of the residents, what they wanted to change. So their request was to have lights in the space that were on the wall instead of the ceiling, that they could turn on and off at will, and that were softer and less institutional. And they wanted them to be bright enough that they could turn off the fluorescent lights. So when the focus group and the staff representative brought this to the maintenance team, at first they said, well, that's nowhere near, putting up sconce lights is nowhere near the $5,000 budget. Like, this is a masonry basement in Seattle in a seismic zone. Like, we're not going to put in wall sconce lights. And there was someone on the maintenance team, someone at this particular building, who said, well, we can still have sconce lights. We can just put the wire conduit on the outside of the brick wall and then just paint it to match. And of course, that was much less than $5,000. And to the residents, it has the exact same effect. So sometimes these like top-down solutions of, oh, we're going to somehow drill through this masonry and hide the wires and everything, like it can get a little, of course it's expensive, and it's not the point, right? And so this to me is a really important lesson about how do we listen to the residents and make these changes and empower the residents, but not have to do everything, the like punch list way all the time as architects. So I I feel like this was a really good success story, because what I heard when I interviewed people at the building is that those fluorescent lights have never been on since they put in the sconces, and residents come down and they turn on the sconces when they arrive, and they turn them off when they leave if no one else is there, and they have full agency of those conditions. You can see just a little blow up of that there. And so you can see, right, of course it's cozier. It's much less institutional than having the fluorescent lights in that basement space. There are other ways to design for this, and as Amanda was talking about more neutral colors, I was remembering our tour of this particular building, Plymouth on Stewart, and this was, it felt very hotel. It's an old residential hotel, but it had a real hotel feel, which was a little bit residential, institutional at the time. And for this building, other than the basketball and the games in the basement, the residents really wanted a whole new paint job of the lobby on the first floor. And they wanted these very welcoming, creamy and homey colors. So in this particular project and in Scargo, the committee made a palette of suggested colors and suggestive fabrics for the furniture, and then they left those palettes at the front desk, and any resident in the building could vote as they walked by. So not just the committee weren't the only people involved, they also got the other residents involved as well. And then you can see some other opportunities here for personalization. Everything you see here was part of that trauma-informed design process. So they wanted a memorial wall in the building for pictures of people who had passed, who used to live there. And the lesson, I think, for all of us as architects in this is to really plan for these opportunities for the future. So as Amanda was saying, we don't know who the future residents are always, but if we have a wall that we know will be art chosen by the residents, or images chosen by the residents, cultural expression chosen by the residents, and we kind of protect that wall from unnecessary switches and sprinkler heads and fire alarm enunciators and everything else that goes into the building. If we protect that wall, later on, the staff can involve residents in picking what that space is going to be like. You can do something similar as well. We saw in some buildings with color. So maybe we don't color the accent wall and we wait to find out, we don't pick that color, we wait to find out who moves in and paint that wall as residents are coming in. So thinking of this not as an end result as we're designing these types of trauma-informed spaces, but thinking of it as a process. So finally, briefly, this pattern of providing connections to nature from inside the common areas. Patrick talked about this with Sanderson. It's not just about being in nature, but it's about seeing nature through the window. And I think this is a prime example. This was at Plymouth on Stewart, a trauma-informed request from the residents to have a plant wall right against this very, very urban condition. This is headed to the market on Stewart at 2nd Avenue, always under construction. And these plants not only connect the residents to nature, but also screen that very urban condition from the inside. So you are looking at nature instead of looking at the construction all the time. And just another example of that. And even after the renovations were complete, then adding plants at Scargo for the same reason along that alley wall on the outside on the alley at the common area. There weren't many examples in a $5,000 budget of connecting common area spaces with interior windows. We did see a little bit. This is at Plymouth and Stewart, but I wanted to end with a new construction building, which is also bringing it full circle for Joanna, another building I believe you were pretty involved with. This is Plymouth on First Hill, which was designed as all of this trauma-informed design renovation work was happening in Plymouth. This project was being completed, and you can see this idea of having all these interior windows connected. So from the common area into the hallway, into the office, and you can even see outside to the street beyond. So some of these little renovation ideas can then seed other ideas in new construction as well. There we go.
Thank you so much, Christina. I loved seeing all those pictures of those Plymouth buildings. I do miss, I miss my clients, that's for sure. I miss working in those buildings, even though I'm super happy to be back home in Las Vegas, where I hope we can get some of these buildings built here and do some of the same work here. And I really appreciate some of the themes that we've talked about today, especially tenant-centered voice, and including tenants in your design process, really understanding who's going to be living at that building. And I also really appreciate that connection to nature. I think the research shows it's really important that we have connection to outdoor spaces, and it's a little bit easier to do in Oregon and Colorado than it is to do in downtown Seattle or even Las Vegas. So it's really nice to see different examples of incorporating that. I just want to thank Stacy and AIA, Monica, for suggesting the coalition for this presentation. It really is exciting to see these kinds of ideas talked about in Nevada. And I really care about supportive housing. I really believe in it as a solution to end homelessness. So thank you so much to all the panelists, and thank you so much to AIA. If any of you, I know we're right at 5:30, but if any of you are interested in learning more about these kinds of topics, the Nevada Housing Coalition and the Elevate Nevada initiative that we're running right now is pretty consistently doing education and trainings and events where you can meet other people doing this kind of work. So please follow us. Our website is nvhousingcoalition.org. I'm very available if you want to email or call me anytime and ask questions, or if you have ideas for future education and training that you want to do here in Nevada specifically, or if you want to get in touch with anyone on the panel, I am happy to put you in touch. I did not ask them if that was okay, but I bet it is. Because one thing about the supportive housing community and people who work in this field is that we love sharing information, because we're really passionate about this intervention, really passionate about building more skills and getting more evidence and research done on trauma-informed design. So it's really easy to get people to show you their buildings, show you their work, and talk about it. So don't be afraid to reach out. Everyone, there's no more questions, but everyone says, well done, great presentation. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it back over to Stacy to close.
Thank you,